You've been carrying something heavy, a memory that won't let go, a decision you wish you could unmake, words that still echo in the quiet moments when you're alone with yourself. And here's what nobody tells you. The weight you're carrying isn't the past itself. It's the story you keep telling about who you were in that moment. Because if you look at it honestly, really honestly, you'll discover something that changes everything. At that time, with the level of awareness you had, with the understanding available to you then, you were doing the absolute best you could. This isn't about making excuses. This is about seeing reality as it actually was. You stand here now, armed with everything you've learned since, and you look back at that earlier version of yourself, expecting them to have known what you know now. But they couldn't have. That version of you was navigating life with different tools, different clarity, a different level of consciousness entirely. Think about this. Condemning your past self for not knowing better is like expecting a child to understand advanced mathematics before they've learned to count. Growth doesn't work that way. You learn by stumbling, by trying and missing the mark, by falling and getting back up. That's the entire process. Every misstep was actually a necessary part of the path that brought you to this moment of awareness. So, here's where forgiveness really begins. Not with some grand gesture or formal ritual, but with this simple shift in perception. Recognizing that you were always doing your best, even when your best looked messy or misguided or completely lost. When you see this, really see it, something softens inside you. And that softening, that's the doorway. That's where forgiveness actually lives. To forgive yourself isn't about pretending nothing happened or erasing events from your timeline. It's about shifting how you see what happened. It's recognizing that every choice, every mistake, every moment you regret was part of your experiment in being human. None of it was a failure against existence. It was all just learning how to walk. But here's the trap most people fall into. They carry their mistakes like rocks in a backpack, accumulating more weight with each passing year, playing the same scenes over and over in their minds, wishing they could rewrite the script. But the past is complete, it's finished, it exists now only as a pattern in your mind. When you keep punishing yourself, you're literally arguing with something that no longer exists anywhere except in your own consciousness. There's a crucial distinction we need to make here. Learning is alive, it's dynamic, it opens new pathways forward. Self-condemnation, on the other hand, is stagnant. It's dead energy. It keeps you chained to a version of yourself that doesn't even exist anymore. True self-compassion means letting those rocks fall from your hands, setting down that heavy pack, and recognizing something profound. You are no longer the person who stumbled. You are the person who learned from the stumbling. And in that recognition, you take your first real step into freedom. Not freedom from your past, but freedom from the prison you've built around it. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Everything true about forgiving yourself applies equally to forgiving others. When someone acts in a way you label as wrong, they're not choosing from infinite possibilities with perfect awareness. They're acting from the limits of their own consciousness, shaped by conditions you may never fully understand. If someone speaks with bitterness, it's because bitterness has taken root in their inner landscape. They learned it from their environment, from wounds that remain invisible to you. When you condemn them completely, you forget something essential. They're already living inside their own suffering. The person lashing out isn't free. They're being driven by pain, fear, confusion, the weight of their own unhealed wounds. Meeting them with more judgment only adds pressure to what's already unbearable for them. Now, this doesn't mean accepting cruelty or excusing harm. It means beginning to perceive the human being underneath the behavior, the wounded child underneath the anger, the suffering underneath the mask they wear. When you can see this, even if you need to walk away from them, you don't carry hatred in your heart. That shift in perception is the beginning of forgiving the world. Here's the thing about judgment. It's effortless, quick. It gives you a momentary feeling of superiority. That's exactly why most people default to it. It costs nothing. But truly understanding another human being, actually stepping into their inner experience, that requires work. It requires you to pause, to think deeply, to feel. And this is where the highest form of intelligence emerges. Not the intelligence of solving equations, or winning debates, but the intelligence of empathy, the ability to see yourself reflected in another person and see them reflected in yourself, to recognize that their anger is your anger wearing a different face. Their confusion is the same confusion you once carried. Their blindness mirrors the blindness you once struggled through. This is real strength. Anyone can retaliate, anyone can condemn, but to look directly at another person and perceive the suffering driving their actions, that's rare wisdom. When you understand at this level, forgiveness stops being something you force yourself to do. It becomes a natural response. You begin to see there was never really anything to forgive in the traditional sense. Only pain that needed to be understood, only suffering seeking recognition. You've probably heard the phrase, hurt people hurt people. Pain reproduces itself. It passes from person to person like an invisible contagion. Someone wounded in childhood often wounds their own children. A harsh word spoken to you gets unconsciously repeated to someone else. The chain continues generation after generation. When we don't wake up to this pattern, when we refuse to forgive, we simply keep passing the poison forward. We become the very thing we once suffered from, and in this way, the entire world stays locked in an endless cycle of resentment and retaliation, revenge and counter-revenge. Forgiveness is the conscious decision to break that cycle. It's refusing to pass along what was handed to you in anger. It's saying, this stops here. This stops with me. Not because the other person deserves your forgiveness, but because you no longer want to carry that burden into your future. In that moment, forgiveness has nothing to do with them. It's entirely about you. It's how you reclaim your freedom from the endless loop of hurt repeating itself. You become the break in the chain, the point where pain stops multiplying and starts dissolving. And here's what most people misunderstand about forgiveness. It's not always about reconciliation or welcoming someone back into your life. Often forgiveness happens silently in the private space of your own heart. You can forgive someone completely and still choose never to walk beside them again, and that's perfectly valid. Forgiveness doesn't require you to forget what happened or to be foolish about future interactions. What it asks is simple, that you stop carrying the fire of resentment inside yourself, because resentment only burns the person holding it. You might believe you're punishing someone else by keeping hatred alive, but in reality, it's your own mind that smolders, your own spirit that gets consumed in those flames. So forgiveness isn't weakness, it isn't indulgence, it's clarity. It's the ability to recognize that holding on chains you to the very thing you're desperate to be free from. When you let go, you release not just them, but yourself. And here's something fascinating. Once you stop demanding that someone change, sometimes they actually do change. But even if they never change, you're no longer bound to their story. That's the quiet power of forgiveness in action. Let me share something about intelligence that most people get backwards. People confuse intelligence with cleverness. Being clever means calculating, manipulating symbols, winning arguments, outsmarting others. But the highest form of intelligence isn't located in the head alone. It lives in the heart that can imagine another person's life as if it were its own. Empathy is the art of stepping into another person's experience, tasting their reality from the inside. And this requires a subtle kind of awareness that goes beyond logic and analysis. Logic by itself will always categorize things as right or wrong, guilty or innocent, good or bad. But empathy asks different questions. What pain created this action? What blindness shaped this choice? What suffering led to this moment? This isn't about excusing cruelty. It's not about dismissing harmful behavior. It's about seeing reality in its full depth. Because nobody wakes up and consciously decides to become bitter, cruel, or lost. They arrive at that place through causes, through a complex web of influences stretching back further than they can trace. To grasp this is real intelligence. It's difficult because it dissolves the easy satisfaction of judgment, but it's liberating because once you perceive the chain of causes, You can no longer hate any single link in that chain. You can only understand it at the deepest level. Forgiveness transcends morality entirely. It becomes a recognition of unity. When you see clearly enough, you begin to understand that the person harming you isn't truly separate from you. Their suffering is your suffering in a different form. Their blindness is another mask worn by the same life force that looks through your eyes. To hate them becomes like hating part of yourself. Imagine your hand scolding your finger for being clumsy, forgetting they're part of the same body. The finger's clumsiness is the hand's clumsiness. Similarly, another person's bitterness isn't separate from life itself. It's life struggling with itself, learning through itself. This is why the great spiritual teachers across all traditions spoke about forgiveness. Not because it's morally superior, but because it's natural. Once you see clearly that there's no separate other to forgive, you realize there's only life stumbling and learning just as you stumble and learn. In this vision, compassion stops being effort. It flows as naturally as breathing. You forgive not because someone told you to, not because it's the right thing to do, but because you understand there's no one outside the totality to hate. There's only the whole expressing itself through infinite forms, learning through infinite experiences. Now, I want you to pause here for a moment, take a breath, and in the comments below, write this phrase. I release what I can no longer carry, not as a casual comment, but as an energetic declaration, a signal to the field of consciousness that you're ready to let go. This isn't just for me to read, this is for you. This is the moment where intention becomes tangible, where internal shift creates external expression. So take that moment now, write it down. I release what I can no longer carry. What we've explored today about forgiveness is actually one strand in a much larger tapestry of conscious transmission. The frequency of forgiveness is profound, but it's part of a complete system of consciousness mastery that moves you from being trapped in dense transmissions to becoming a clear, intentional broadcast in the field. If you're feeling the shift happening as we speak, if you're ready to explore the full architecture of how consciousness creates reality, I've compiled everything into Beyond the Frequencies, a quantum guide to consciousness mastery. It's linked in the pinned comment below. When this understanding becomes clear, forgiveness stops being something you try to do. It happens by itself, because how can you continue condemning a world that isn't separate from you? How can you keep punishing yourself when the person who made those mistakes no longer exists? You see, all along you were moving toward awareness, just as everyone else is moving toward awareness now. Each at their own pace, each through their own path, and here's the strange beauty of it. When you stop demanding perfection from yourself or from others, you begin to see the elegance of this messy dance we're all doing. The stumbling becomes part of the choreography. But let's go deeper into what this actually means for your daily life, because understanding forgiveness philosophically is one thing. Living it is something else entirely. Every time you replay that old story about what you should have done differently, you're choosing to keep that version of yourself alive. You're feeding energy into a ghost, and that ghost demands so much of you. It demands your attention, your emotional energy, your sense of peace. It tells you that you're defined by that moment, that mistake, that choice. But here's what it doesn't tell you. You get to choose which story you empower. Think about it this way. Your past exists in your consciousness as memory, as story, as narrative. But the power that story has over you right now is determined entirely by the attention you give it and the meaning you assign to it. Two people can experience the same event and create completely different stories about what it meant. One story keeps them trapped, the other story sets them free. The event itself is neutral. It's just what happened. The suffering or freedom comes from the interpretation, the story, the meaning you layer on top of the raw experience. So forgiving yourself means authoring a new story about your past. Not a story that pretends nothing happened or claims you were blameless, but a story that includes the full context. Your level of awareness at the time, the conditions you were operating within, the understanding you had access to, the wounds you were carrying, the fears driving you, the confusion clouding your judgment. When you include all of that, the story becomes more complete, more truthful, more compassionate, and in that completeness, forgiveness naturally arises. You're not excusing what happened, you're understanding it. And understanding is the soil in which forgiveness grows. Now let's talk about the quantum level of this, because this is where science and spirituality merge into the same truth. In quantum physics, we know that the observer affects the observed. Your consciousness, your attention literally influences what manifests in your experience. When you keep observing yourself through the lens of guilt and shame, when you keep measuring yourself against that old story of failure, you're collapsing the wave function of your potential into that same pattern over and over. You're literally creating more of what you're focused on. But when you shift your observation, when you begin witnessing yourself with compassion instead of condemnation, the quantum field responds differently. New possibilities open up, different timelines become accessible. This isn't metaphorical. This is how consciousness works at the fundamental level. Your sustained attention is creative. It doesn't just observe reality. It participates in constructing reality. So every moment you spend in self-forgiveness is literally restructuring the quantum field of your experience. You're not just feeling better psychologically, you're shifting the actual fabric of what's possible for you. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Forgiveness operates as a frequency. When you forgive, you're not just changing your thoughts. You're changing your energetic signature. You're broadcasting a different signal into the field. And the field responds to frequency like attracts, like at the quantum level. When you're vibrating at the frequency of resentment, you magnetize more experiences that justify resentment. When you shift to the frequency of forgiveness, you begin attracting experiences that reflect that frequency back to you. It's not magic, it's physics. It's the fundamental law of resonance operating through your consciousness. This is why forgiving others isn't just kind or moral. It's strategic. It's intelligent. Because as long as you're holding resentment toward anyone, you're maintaining a frequency that blocks your own expansion. You're keeping yourself locked in the same energetic pattern as the person you resent. You're literally bound to them through that resentment, connected in the field through that negative charge. Forgiveness cuts that cord. It releases you both, not because you're being generous, but because you're being wise, because you understand how energy actually works. If what I'm sharing here is resonating with something inside you, if you're feeling a shift happening as you listen to these words, then I want to invite you to subscribe not just to this channel, but to this frequency, to this space where transformation happens, to this conversation about consciousness and reality and the power you actually have to reshape your experience. Subscribing isn't just about getting notifications. It's about staying aligned with this understanding. It's about continuing to expose yourself to perspectives that elevate your awareness. So, if you're feeling that resonance, click that subscribe button now. Stay connected to this space. Stay in this frequency. Let's explore another layer of this. There's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation that most people confuse. Reconciliation means the relationship continues. Forgiveness means you're no longer carrying the poison of resentment. You can forgive completely and never speak to that person again. You can forgive completely and still maintain firm boundaries. You can forgive completely and still acknowledge that the relationship is over. Forgiveness doesn't require you to trust someone who proved themselves untrustworthy. It doesn't require you to give someone another opportunity to harm you. What it requires is that you stop drinking the poison of hatred while hoping they suffer. And here's something subtle that most people miss. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive isn't the one who hurt you decades ago. It's the person you were yesterday, last week, last month. Because forgiving others happens at a distance. You can forgive someone from your past who's no longer in your life. But forgiving yourself requires you to face the one you're with every single moment. To look in the mirror and offer compassion to the reflection staring back at you. To speak to yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a dear friend going through difficulty. Most of us have an internal voice that speaks to us with a harshness we'd never accept from another person. If someone spoke to you the way you speak to yourself internally, you'd cut them out of your life. But because it's your own voice, you think it's justified. You think it's keeping you accountable or preventing future mistakes. But it's not. It's just creating suffering. That inner critic doesn't make you better. It makes you smaller. It doesn't prevent mistakes. It prevents growth, because growth requires experimentation, and experimentation requires accepting that failure is part of the process. So forgiving yourself means changing that internal dialogue, speaking to yourself like someone you love, acknowledging your mistakes without defining yourself by them, learning from errors without being destroyed by them, recognizing that you're constantly evolving, constantly changing, constantly becoming something new. The person who made that mistake isn't who you are anymore. You've integrated that lesson. You've grown from that experience. You're literally different now at the cellular level, at the neurological level, at the consciousness level. There's a practice I want to share with you, something you can do right now as you're listening. Think of a moment in your past that still carries weight, a decision you regret, an action you wish you could undo, something that still makes you cringe when it surfaces in your memory. Got it? Good. Now, I want you to do something unusual. I want you to place your hand on your heart, feel the warmth there, feel your heartbeat, and I want you to speak directly to that earlier version of yourself, the one who was living through that moment. Speak to them with compassion. Tell them you were doing your best with what you knew. You were navigating life with the awareness you had. I see you. I understand you. And I release you from my judgment. Feel that, don't just think it. Feel it in your body. Let those words land in your nervous system, because forgiveness isn't just a mental concept. It's an embodied shift. It's something that happens in your tissues, in your cells, in the subtle energy fields surrounding your physical form. When you forgive at that level, you're literally releasing trapped energy. You're freeing up life force that was bound in maintaining that old story. And that energy becomes available for creation, for growth, for new possibilities. Now, let me show you something about how unforgiveness actually operates in your system. When you hold on to resentment, whether toward yourself or another, you're essentially running the same program over and over in your consciousness. Every time you replay that memory, every time you rehash what happened, you're not just remembering, you're re-experiencing it. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish between past and present when you're deeply immersed in memory. The stress response activates, the emotional charge floods your system. Your body believes it's happening now, and in a very real way, it is happening now because you're recreating it in your present moment awareness. This is why some people carry wounds from decades ago as if they happened yesterday. Because in their consciousness, in their energetic field, it is still happening. The event finished long ago in linear time. But in the timeless space of consciousness, they've kept it alive. They've been the one maintaining its existence, feeding it with attention, giving it power through repetition, and this costs them enormously. It costs them their presence, their peace, their available energy for creating new experiences. But here's what's beautiful about understanding this mechanism. Once you see how you've been keeping the past alive, you also see that you have the power to release it. You're not a victim of your memories. You're the one giving them life, and what you've empowered, you can also depower. What you've fed, you can starve. What you've maintained, you can let dissolve. This is the practical side of forgiveness that nobody talks about. It's consciousness work, it's energy management, it's choosing where you place your attention and what you give your life force to. Think about it this way. You have a finite amount of attention in any given day. Attention is your most valuable resource. It's more valuable than time or money because attention is what shapes your reality. Whatever receives your sustained attention grows in your experience. If you're giving substantial attention to old resentments, old hurts, old versions of yourself that no longer exist, then that's attention unavailable for creating your actual life now. It's like trying to drive forward while constantly looking in the rear-view mirror. You can do it, but you're going to crash eventually. Forgiveness is the decision to redirect your attention, to take your life force back from the past and invest it in the present, to stop feeding old stories and start creating new ones. And when you do this, something shifts in the field around you. Opportunities appear that weren't there before, relationships change, your health improves, your clarity increases. Not because forgiveness is magic, but because you freed up enormous amounts of energy that can now flow toward what actually serves your growth. Let me share something about the energetic mechanics of this. In traditional Chinese medicine, they understand that stuck emotions create stuck energy in the body. Resentment, anger, bitterness. These dense emotions lodge themselves in your organs, your tissues, your energy channels. They create blockages, and these blockages don't just affect you emotionally, they affect you physically. They show up as tension, as pain, as disease. The body becomes the storage unit for all the forgiveness you haven't offered. When you genuinely forgive, you're not just changing your mind, you're releasing these energetic blockages. You're allowing stagnant energy to move again, to flow, to circulate, and your body knows this immediately. You might feel it as a deep exhale you didn't know you were holding, a release in your shoulders, a softening in your belly, a clarity in your mind. These aren't just psychological experiences. They're energetic shifts happening in real time. And here's something fascinating about energy. It doesn't just affect you, it affects the field around you. Quantum physics shows us that everything is connected through the quantum field. When you shift your energy through forgiveness, you're literally changing the field. And that changed field affects everyone connected to you. This is how forgiveness ripples outward, how your internal shift creates external change, how one person choosing forgiveness can influence an entire family system, an entire community without saying a single word. I'm curious, has there been a moment in your life when forgiving someone or yourself created an unexpected shift in your reality? Drop your experience in the comments. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. This is why your forgiveness work isn't just personal, it's collective. When you forgive, you're not just healing yourself, you're healing the web of relationships you're part of. You're shifting patterns that might have been passed down through generations. You're becoming the breakpoint where old cycles end and new possibilities begin. This is profound responsibility and profound power. The work you do in your own consciousness affects the entire field. Nothing is separate, nothing is isolated. Your healing is everyone's healing. Now, let's talk about something that might challenge you. The hardest people to forgive are often the ones who hurt us most deeply. And they are often the ones who will never apologize, never acknowledge the harm, never change. So, forgiveness becomes about your freedom, not their redemption. It's about releasing yourself from the prison of waiting for them to do something that might never happen. You can spend your entire life waiting for an apology that never comes, letting that wait consume your energy, your joy, your peace, or you can forgive them anyway and reclaim your life. Now, this doesn't mean what they did was acceptable. It doesn't minimize the harm. It doesn't let them off the hook morally or ethically. What it does is free you from being defined by what they did to you. It transforms you from victim to sovereign being, from someone shaped by their actions to someone who shapes their own reality despite their actions. That's the ultimate power, not the power to change what happened, but the power to change what it means, to choose the story you tell about it, to decide how it shapes you moving forward. And here's something profound about this level of forgiveness. When you forgive someone who harmed you deeply, you're not just healing your relationship with them. You're healing your relationship with life itself, because that wound created a belief about reality, about people, about trust, about safety. That wound became a filter through which you interpreted every subsequent experience. By healing the wound, by forgiving the person who created it, you're removing that filter. You're opening up to life again. You're allowing yourself to be fully present without constantly protecting yourself from a past that's already over. The great spiritual traditions all point to this same truth in different languages. Buddhism calls it letting go of attachment. Christianity calls it forgiveness and grace. Hinduism speaks of karma and release. Taoism describes going with the flow, not resisting what is. They're all pointing to the same fundamental reality. Holding on to resentment is suffering, and releasing it is freedom. This isn't just spiritual philosophy. This is practical instruction for living without constant inner turmoil. When you truly forgive, something interesting happens in your neurology. The neural pathways associated with that resentment begin to weaken. The neurons that fire together whenever you think about that person or that event start to disconnect. New pathways form. Your brain literally rewires itself around forgiveness instead of resentment. And this shows up in your body too. Chronic tension releases, stress hormones decrease, your immune system functions better. Forgiveness isn't just good for your soul, it's good for your physical health. Your body knows the difference between holding on and letting go, and it responds accordingly. There's another dimension to this that connects directly to how you create your future. Your emotional state right now is literally the blueprint for what you're magnetizing toward you. If you're carrying resentment, bitterness, or self-condemnation, that emotional frequency is the signal you're broadcasting into the field, and the universe, being a mirror, reflects that frequency back to you in the form of experiences, people, and situations that match it. This isn't punishment, it's just resonance, like attracts like at the most fundamental level of reality. So when you're holding unforgiveness, you're not just stuck in the past emotionally, you're actively creating more of the same in your future. You're magnetizing experiences that validate your resentment, people who trigger you, situations that make you feel like a victim, circumstances that seem to prove your belief that the world is unfair or that you're unworthy. The field responds to your dominant frequency, and your dominant frequency is shaped by your dominant emotional state. This is the law of attraction at its most fundamental operation. But when you shift into forgiveness, when you genuinely release the charge around past events, your frequency changes instantly. You're no longer broadcasting victimhood or resentment. You're broadcasting freedom, compassion, understanding. And the field responds to this new frequency. Different opportunities appear, different people enter your life, different possibilities open up that simply weren't available at the old frequency. This is how forgiveness literally changes your timeline. It shifts you onto a different track, a different probability stream in the quantum field of potential outcomes. Now I want to address something that might be coming up for you. You might be thinking, but what if I forgive and nothing changes? What if I do all this work and my life stays the same? And here's what you need to understand. Forgiveness isn't a transaction. It's not a bargaining chip where you release resentment and the universe owes you a better life. That's still operating from ego, still trying to control outcomes, still treating forgiveness as a means to an end. True forgiveness is the end itself. It's not about what you get. It's about what you become. When you forgive, you're not doing it to manipulate reality into giving you what you want. You're doing it because you recognize that carrying resentment is its own punishment and releasing it is its own reward. The freedom you feel is the point, the peace you experience is the point, the lightness in your being is the point. Everything else that shifts in your external reality is just a natural consequence of your internal transformation. And here's something subtle. Sometimes forgiveness means acknowledging that you needed that experience, that painful relationship, that betrayal, that mistake you made. Because without it, you wouldn't have developed the depth you now have, the wisdom you now carry, the compassion you now feel. Some of your greatest strengths came from your deepest wounds. Some of your most beautiful qualities grew from your darkest moments. When you can see this, when you can actually feel gratitude for experiences that once broke you, you've reached a profound level of forgiveness. You're no longer just releasing the past. You're integrating it as a necessary part of your evolution. This doesn't mean glorifying trauma or pretending suffering is good. It means recognizing that you're sophisticated enough to extract wisdom from pain, strong enough to transform poison into medicine, conscious enough to see how your wounds became your teachers. When you reach this level of understanding, forgiveness becomes almost effortless because you're no longer fighting with what happened. You're in alignment with your entire journey, including the parts you wish you could change. Let me share something about self-forgiveness specifically, because this is where most people struggle the most. When you hurt someone else, when you made a choice that harmed another person, the guilt can feel overwhelming. You replay the scenario endlessly, thinking about what you should have done differently, and that guilt becomes its own kind of prison. You believe you don't deserve to feel good because of what you did. You believe your suffering is appropriate punishment, but here's what that belief misses: your suffering doesn't help the person you hurt. It doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't make the world better. It just creates more suffering. It adds your pain to the pain that already exists. Real atonement isn't about drowning in guilt. It's about becoming the kind of person who wouldn't make that same choice again. It's about integrating the lesson so deeply that your behavior naturally changes. It's about using that mistake as fuel for growth instead of fuel for self-destruction. When you forgive yourself for hurting others, you're not excusing what you did. You're committing to do better. You're choosing evolution over stagnation. You're saying, I learned from this, and I'm different now because of it. And here's something powerful. When you genuinely forgive yourself, when you stop punishing yourself internally, you often find yourself naturally making amends in ways you couldn't before. Because you're not operating from guilt anymore. You're operating from genuine compassion and understanding, and that energy is what actually heals relationships, what actually repairs harm, what actually creates positive change in the world. Guilt keeps you stuck. Forgiveness sets you free to actually contribute something meaningful. There's also the dimension of forgiving life itself. Sometimes the hardest thing to forgive isn't a person, it's existence. It's the fact that life gave you certain circumstances, certain challenges, certain pain that feels unfair. You look around and see others who seem to have it easier, and resentment toward life itself builds up. Why did this happen to me? Why was I given this family, this body, this set of challenges? And carrying that resentment toward existence is like being angry at gravity for pulling you down. It's fighting with the fundamental nature of reality. But when you forgive life itself, when you stop demanding that your journey should have been different, something profound shifts. You start seeing that every single thing you experienced, even the hardest parts, shaped you into who you are. And who you are includes strengths and insights and depths that wouldn't exist without those challenges. You start recognizing that life wasn't punishing you, it was sculpting you. Every difficulty was pressure creating a diamond. Every loss was space being cleared for something new. Every ending was a beginning in disguise. So, as we move toward the end of our time together, I want you to understand something crucial. Everything I've shared with you isn't just information. It's not just philosophy or theory. It's an invitation into a different way of being. A way of being that's lighter because you're not carrying the weight of unforgiven past. A way of being that's more present because you're not trapped in old stories. A way of being that's more powerful because you're no longer giving your energy to resentment. The practice of forgiveness is ultimately the practice of freedom. Every act of forgiveness, whether toward yourself or others, is an act of liberation. You're freeing energy that was locked in the past. You're reclaiming power that was bound to old stories. You're opening space for new possibilities to emerge. And you're changing your frequency in the quantum field, shifting what you magnetize into your experience. Here's what I want you to do right now. In the comments below, drop one word, just one word that captures the energy you're choosing to embody moving forward. Not the energy you've been carrying, but the energy you're stepping into. Maybe it's peace, maybe it's freedom, maybe it's light or release or love. Whatever word arises for you, drop it in the comments. This isn't just for me. This is your energetic signature to the quantum field, your declaration of intention, your statement of who you're becoming. So take a moment and share that word now. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I invite you to do that now. Subscribe not just to stay connected to more content, but to stay aligned with this frequency of conscious transformation. The more of us who gather in this space, the more powerful the collective field becomes. Every person who joins this community strengthens the frequency we're all tuning into. So subscribe, stay connected, stay elevated, be part of this movement of consciousness, awakening to its own power. Consider watching this video again tomorrow morning. Let these frequencies recalibrate your consciousness at the start of your day. And if someone comes to mind as you're listening, someone who's carrying the weight of unforgiveness, share this with them. When you share this understanding, you're not just helping them, you're reinforcing your own embodiment of these principles and creating a ripple in the collective field that accelerates transformation for everyone it touches. This is how consciousness evolves, one shared frequency at a time. To forgive, then, is simply to allow life to be what it actually is, a process of falling and learning, breaking and mending, stumbling and rising again and again. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It releases the grip that what happened has on you, and in that release, you discover something unexpected. A freedom that's lighter than any judgment, a peace that's deeper than any resentment, a spaciousness that allows life to flow through you without constant resistance. So forgive yourself, forgive the world, forgive the ones who hurt you, forgive the ones you hurt, not because it's noble or righteous or morally superior, but because it's the only way to keep life flowing. The only way to stay open, the only way to remain free, and in that forgiveness, you're not losing anything. You're gaining everything. You're reclaiming yourself from the prison of the past and stepping fully into the power of the present moment, where everything is always beginning again, where you're always free to choose differently, where forgiveness is simply the natural response of a consciousness that understands. We're all just learning how to be human, one stumble at a time. And that's not a failure. That's exactly how it's supposed to work. Now, what we've explored about forgiveness today is actually preparation for something deeper. Understanding yourself not as someone who forgives, but as the field itself. Because once you've released the weight of resentment and self-condemnation, once you've stopped identifying with the one who was hurt or the one who hurt others, you begin to realize you're not a separate entity in the field. You are the field experiencing itself. This shift from being in reality to being reality itself is the final phase of awakening, and it changes everything about how you move through existence. You're no longer seeking coherence or manifestation. You become the source of it. Watch the next video to understand how this recognition transforms the very foundation of your experience.